Hi guys, Michael Abayimi here. So I finally saw Anikulapo Rise of the Spectre on Netflix, the new Kule Afalaya series. And while I realize I am a bit late to the party, this is what happens when you release your series on the same day as Dune Part 2. But in any case, I finally seen the series and I felt it was only fair for me to share my thoughts, given how vocal I was in my disdain for the first film, the film that more or less served as a prequel to this one. So in this video, I'm going to go over my thoughts about the new show, how I feel it measures up compared to the last one, and if it managed to address any of the issues I highlighted. So the TV show pretty much picks up where the movie left off, with Saro having been killed for a second time, and now he's wandering the spirit realm aimlessly, like trying to cross over to the other side. But apparently when he gets to the gates of heaven, he's turned back because it turns out that all the people he had raised haven't gotten the power of Akala, the mystical bird. He had to repay the debts before he was going to be allowed into heaven. So he's more or less sent back to earth to wander around as a spirit. And there he begins the process of plotting different ways to undo the good he had done in the first film. And I just have to say that this premise, this framing device, or whatever you want to call it, is a very good idea for a sequel. So I was already kind of excited when I saw the direction the show seemed to be heading. Like, I can just imagine him going around trying to find inventive ways of killing the people he had effectively saved in the last film. But of course, as I quickly found out, none of that was actually to be, because he eventually stumbles across the woman who had actually taken offense to him raising her up in the last film. And apparently, since the last film, the woman had gone blind, and in her blindness, she was still able to see him even though he was a spirit. And she offers him a way for him to actually regain his corporal self, his body basically. And it's involved burying himself and performing some kind of ritual, which he eventually does, and that's more or less how that entire plot thread just fizzled out into nothingness. So the real plot then centered upon Saro trying to regain his mortal life and everything, but it turns out that the three people he had already killed were now hunting him as ghosts themselves, and he had to strike a deal with them basically. The deal involved them giving him 3 years to live out his life, and after those 3 years he was meant to die and eventually lead those spirits across the spirit realm. It is unclear how he suddenly became this guardian for lost souls, but that's just a TV show. The TV show doesn't make any attempts to explain any of this. So I realized that synopsis sounded a bit convoluted and long-winded, but trust me when I say the entire show on its own was kind of nonsensical, being that the stories, the plot threads, different subplots and all that don't really go anywhere. You have a lot of like characters being introduced that just vanish into nowhere after a while, only to reappear later on. You have subplots that never really get resolved, even though they are brought up and focused on. So that's just the quality of this show in general, in a nutshell. But one of the first things I actually noticed when I started watching the show was the quality of the English dub. So for some reason, I'm not sure why, but automatically it was set to the English dub, and I just have to say that whoever did that English dub did a very bad job. Like, the acting was so poor, the dialogue was so nonsensical. It got to a point that I eventually had to investigate, and I saw what had happened, so I had to like revert back to the original Yoruba dub, which was way better than what the English dub was offering. So basically, it is a PSA for anybody that is watching the show on Netflix and happens to wonder why the dialogue is as bad as it is. Trust me, it sounds a lot better in Yoruba. That said, it doesn't take very long into the show before you start noticing all of its shortcomings, most of which were some of the things I highlighted in my review of the first film. Like, it just had this overriding lack of focus. It was clear that the show didn't really have any particular direction. You had all these characters just meandering about, doing different things, and all the while you're just there trying to wonder how any of this has any kind of significance, how any of this connects to what we already know about these characters. And basically the entire show was just one long extended movie, and to even call it that seems like an insult to long movies. It was basically just hours of footage that were shot. You had all the beautiful drone photography as usual, but the sad part is that none of that really amounts to anything when the story itself fails to really engage you on any meaningful level. And one reason for this is because the series tends to tell rather than show. And of course, we know that the actual mantra is show, don't tell. So for example, we are told quite early on in the show that Akala, the mystical bird, was quite angry with the people of Oyo, and because of that, both the young and the old were rampantly dying. But we never actually get to see this in any meaningful way beyond one throwaway clip that they showed at the beginning of the series. And I just kind of have to wonder that how is this actually happening when you see everybody more or less going about living their day-to-day life? Like, we have all the establishing shots showing all the market women carrying load on their head, walking around, and you just never get that sense of dread or that sense of death hovering over this village. So this is an example of them telling us something rather than just showing it to us and making it more tangible. But I think what is actually at the core of my issues with the TV show is the characters and how poorly developed each one was. So I already highlighted the laundry list of issues I had with characters like Saro in the first film. And at the heart of all this was just the fact that his character lacked any kind of agency. Pretty much everything was just happening to him. He didn't really seem to have any particular control over his own fates. And that more or less is what we get here in this series. Only that this time around, it is a lot worse and more obvious that this character was just not properly written or developed. So to help illustrate the issues I have with the characters, I'm going to compare the show Anikulapo Rise of the Spectre with another show that just started airing recently called Shogun. So for example, Anikulapo Rise of the Spectre more or less starts with Saro wandering the spirit realm, just meandering as he more or less tends to do throughout the entire show. And he gets to the gates of heaven where he's told he needs to go back, and basically everything that happens just more or less happens to him. It's not as if he's taking any steps to get anything done or taking any steps to actually move his own story forward. And when you now contrast this with something like Shogun and a character like John Blackthorne, who was introduced as a member of a crew of pirates or sailors that were more or less lost at sea, and they had gotten to a point where they had lost all hope. So just from the introduction of the character, you could see that he still had this desire to find Japan. He still had this drive, like this belief that they were on this mission, this crusade that really needed seeing through. Even though the captain of the ship had given up, you could see that he still had a very strong will and he was still determined. And that strong will and determination carries through over the course of the show, at least up to the point where we are now. And this is just the difference between a character like that and a character like Saro. A character like John Blackthorne actually does things. He actually has drive. He's actually making moves. While a character like Saro just has things happening to him. Like, he has to rely on external factors and external people from gods and whatnot for him to be able to survive or thrive or move forward. For example, now there was a point where he woke up and discovered some drums of palm wine at the back of his house, and basically this is how he gets into the palm wine business in the town that he just wandered into. And later on in the series, those same drums of palm wine run dry. And what does he do? He more or less just goes to bed. Like, literally the next scene, they show him lying down in bed with no care in the world of how he's going to sustain himself, how he's going to meet up with the business he had started. Like, it just felt like he had no direction, more or less, and that's not really what would carry viewers or connect viewers to a main character of a show. So it just felt like the character lacked any kind of development whatsoever. It was almost to the point that I felt like I was being trolled by what I was seeing, because it was just perplexing that a character could be this poorly developed, this poorly written, to the point that it just doesn't even make sense, even when looking at it objectively. So the whole thing just seems ridiculous. Like, we should have gone beyond points of writing all these mediocre stories with all these half-baked characters that don't really have any kind of drive, don't really have any kind of motive or any kind of goal that they're trying to strive towards. Because when a character lacks drive, lacks motive, lacks any kind of thing they're striving to get, it gets very hard as an audience to get attached to those characters. Like, more or less, you just want to see the characters die, because the characters have shown you that they are very weak-minded, weak in spirit. So there's just nothing redeeming about all these characters, and that is what is at the core of my problem with this particular show and most of Kunle Afolayan's movies and TV shows and whatnot. All that said, there is one saving grace in terms of characterization, and that comes in the form of Basharun. So I don't know the actor who played this particular character. He was positioned more or less as the villain or the main antagonist for the show, and I just have to say that this was the one character that had anything remotely resembling depth. This was the one character that had a clear motive, the one character that I found myself getting attached to, which is kind of ironic when you see that the character is positioned as the villain and more or less you're supposed to be rooting for your so-called heroes. But in this case, all I wanted to see was Bashan, and he never actually disappointed. The actor who played the character was eating up the scenery. Like, I just loved the portrayal of the character and how the character was realized. And more or less, I just felt that he actually deserved to be in a better TV show and not be subjected to all this mediocrity that was just surrounding that character. So I could of course go ahead to highlight how painful it was to watch all the fight scenes and how the ending in general was just nonsensical. And even though Saro was finally reunited with Arolake, we just see him wandering off at the ending, like he had no desire to come back and rescue her from prison. He had more or less just given up and decided to go and live out the rest of his days, which just once again shows that this character lacks any kind of depth, any kind of redeeming qualities. So I'm wondering why we were meant to follow this character's journey throughout. It just felt like I was wasting my time, more or less. So this once again just points to the entire show lacking any kind of direction, lacking any kind of focus. The characters had very little depth to them, and I'm just saddened for the fact that this is the level we're still at in our Nollywood filmmaking. Because you would think that with the proliferation of all these like foreign shows like Game of Thrones, that we would have been able to learn one or two things about character development, one or two things about how to plot your stories and actually tell compelling stories. But once again, this is the level we're still at, and I'm just saddened by the fact that it is reflected here in this particular TV show. So anyway, these are just my thoughts about Anikulapo, Rise of the Spectre. What did you think? Did you think the show was an improvement about the movie, or do you agree with some of the criticisms I've highlighted? Let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed watching this discussion, and to subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on if you'd like to see more discussions like this in the future. And until the next one, this is Michael, signing off.